A few weeks ago, on an otherwise ordinary Thursday morning, I was deep in the usual chaos of getting the kids ready for school. It was 7:30 a.m., and in the middle of the madness, the shrill ring of the phone broke through the noise. I glanced over, a bit curious about who would be calling that early. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, which only made me more curious. Cautiously, I answered, "Hello," and to my surprise, it was Emily, my wife. I couldn't help but wonder why she'd be calling me when we had just talked the night before. Emily works for a small marketing firm, so it's not unusual for her to be away for work. I stay home with our two kids and work remotely, while she's constantly bouncing between her office and various client meetings. She also works at a printing company downtown. Even with our different schedules, we've made it work over the years and lived a comfortable life. We have a nice suburban house, with 4 bedrooms and even a swimming pool, and we've built a great circle of friends. But that call threw me off. She told me that the night before, while staying at a hotel, her purse had been stolen from the lobby when she went down to grab a newspaper. Cancel our credit cards right away and get new ones ordered. I've already told Ella, my boss, and she's arranging for American Express to overnight replacements. She'll also transfer me some money to get by until then, Emily explained, clearly sounding rattled that I found myself asking, "You're usually so careful." What happened? Well, I guess I got distracted. I left my purse at the cashier's counter while I went to grab more reading material, and by the time I came back, it was gone. The cashier said she was dealing with another customer and didn't notice anything. My driver's license was in there too, but the hotel staff is checking the nearby dumpsters. If they don't find it, I'll have to take a taxi to my meeting, she answered, trying to brush it off like it wasn't that big of a deal. Don't worry, I'll handle the credit cards right away, I reassured her. Emily apologized, saying, "I know, I messed up. But aside from the $1,200 in cash that was in my wallet, we should be okay. We can replace the other cards as needed. Thankfully, I still have my makeup, so I'll be fine for the presentation. How are the kids? I miss how things used to be when we were all together." That call set off a chain of events I never saw coming. I brushed off her missing purse at the time, canceled the cards like she asked, and life went on as normal. At least, that's what I thought. But something significant came to light a few weeks later that changed everything. Earlier today, I stumbled across a statement from Emily's Fidelity account, the one where she's been managing the money she inherited after her parents died in that awful accident a few years back. I've always respected her privacy when it comes to that account, but I happened to find it while I was searching for our home insurance documents. I remembered that she had received about $350,000 from the inheritance, and I couldn't help but wonder how much it had grown over time. To my surprise, the balance had grown to over $400,000. But something else caught my eye, a $3,000 withdrawal from her money market account, made about 6 weeks ago. My curiosity got the better of me, so I started looking into it further. It turns out she had written a check to a local jewelry store just a couple of days after she lost her purse. Now, that got me thinking. She hadn't mentioned buying any jewelry for me, and I hadn't heard anything about gifts for anyone else. She has a brother, but I couldn't see why he'd need something that expensive. With all these questions buzzing in my head, I went to the computer, looked up the jewelry store, and found their phone number. I called them up, figuring I could get some answers. The woman who answered was polite enough. I gave her my name and explained that I was inquiring about a recent purchase, saying we might have had an issue with it and were wondering about any store warranties. She pulled up the records and asked, "What's the problem with the rings?" I found myself momentarily confused, trying to wrap my head around what kind of rings the woman could be talking about. What rings? Emily hadn't mentioned anything about losing her wedding or engagement rings, just the stolen purse. Fortunately, the woman on the other end of the line filled in the blanks. "Oh, I remember this transaction well," she began. "Your wife came in quite upset. She told me her wedding and engagement rings had been stolen, and she was looking for replacements. It was a bit of a process to find rings that would meet her needs. She used her company's credit card as collateral, and later, she sent us a check to settle the full amount. Now that you mention an issue with the rings, let me reassure you that we offer a 90-day warranty in case something's wrong. Is the diamond setting loose, by any chance? For a moment, I couldn't even respond. Her wedding and engagement rings were stolen? I had no idea. Emily had never said a word about that. All she ever told me was that her purse had been stolen at the hotel. I paused, letting the new information sink in, trying to piece it together. Listen, I finally said, keeping my voice steady, though my mind was a mess. I need to discuss this with my wife before making any decisions. I'll get back to you. The woman on the phone seemed a bit puzzled, but not nearly as confused as I was. I said goodbye, hung up, and just sat there in silence for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it all. If her wedding and engagement rings were in her purse when it was stolen, why the hell would she be carrying them around in the first place? That thought hit me like a ton of bricks. What kind of married woman carries her wedding ring in her purse unless she doesn't want people to know she's married? The question gnawed me. Emily had no reason, at least none that I could think of, to hide the fact she was married. There were no professional reasons for her to do so, and no one at her job would care about her being married or not. But if she wanted to present herself as single in some other setting, like at a bar or with clients, then things started to make a lot less sense and a whole lot more troubling. My mind spiraled to places I didn't want to go. Was it possible that, during her business trips, she was pretending to be single? Could she have been considering cheating on me? The very idea made me feel sick to my stomach. Emily and I had been married for 11 years. We have 2 incredible kids, Max, who's 7, and Sophia, who's 6. I always thought we had a solid marriage. Sure, like anyone else, we had our ups and downs, but nothing that ever made me question her loyalty, let alone her love for me. We had what I thought was a good life. We've got a nice home in the suburbs, a tight-knit group of friends, and I had no reason to think anything was wrong in our personal life, but this threw everything into doubt. She travels once a month, staying a couple of nights in different cities, supposedly for work. If she wanted to step out of our marriage, those trips would be the perfect cover. I realized I didn't really know what she did while she was away. Was she out with clients? Or was she doing something she didn't want me to know about? Something she felt the need to take off her wedding ring for. It was clear that losing her rings bothered her enough to replace them with replicas, ones that looked just like the originals. Those rings meant something to me. I'd bought them back when we were starting out, scraping by with my modest salary. They weren't anything extravagant, but they were a symbol of our commitment. It wouldn't have cost much to recreate them, but that wasn't the point. The point was, she hadn't told me. Why hadn't she just filed an insurance claim? It would have been the logical thing to do, but then I'd have known. She was hiding something. And the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't ignore the possibility that she had lied to me about the entire situation. That I couldn't shake the nagging feeling, so I picked up the phone again. This time, I called the hotel where she'd said the theft happened. I asked if they had any records of the incident, and to my surprise, they did. They faxed me a copy of the report. As I sat there, reading through it, my heart sank. The report, signed by Emily, told a different story than the one she'd given me. She claimed her purse had been stolen while she was dancing in the hotel's hall, left it at a booth, and when she returned, it was gone. But the real kicker? She specifically mentioned in the report that she didn't want to involve the police. That I couldn't believe it. She hadn't just lied to me about the rings, she'd made up an entirely different story. I tried to come up with some other explanation, some way to make sense of it all. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. But no matter how hard I tried, my thoughts kept circling back to the same dark conclusions. One thing was becoming clearer by the minute. Those rings were in her purse when she was out dancing with some man I didn't know, doing God knows what. The idea of her being with someone else made my skin crawl, but I couldn't deny what my gut was telling me. If she had nothing to hide, why wouldn't she just tell me the truth? Why create this elaborate story about the stolen purse? Weeks had gone by since that night, and now, she was preparing for another work trip in just a few days. As much as it pained me, I knew I had to dig deeper. I had to find out what she was really doing during these trips, what her nights away from home looked like. Was she involved with other men? Was that what this was all about? Maybe losing the rings had rattled her, made her realize what she was risking, that I dreaded what I might uncover, but I knew I had to. If I found out she was being unfaithful, it would shatter our marriage. I couldn't imagine how we would go on, especially with our kids. The thought of how this would affect them terrified me. But one thing was certain, this mystery of the lost rings wasn't going to go away on its own. If I didn't find out the truth, it would eat away at me until there was nothing left. She was, without a doubt, a great mother. No one could argue that. But the thought of her having custody of the kids, especially with how often she was gone for work, twisted my gut. If there was any truth to what I feared, I couldn't imagine letting her take them away from me, even part-time. My mind raced, desperately trying to piece together anything that might confirm or deny her faithfulness. Were there clues I was missing? What was she doing during those trips when she was far from home? It's one thing to suspect infidelity, but another to dive into the gritty details. I started to wonder, did she take precautions if she was sleeping with someone else? Did she insist on using protection? I couldn't believe she'd be reckless enough to risk bringing home some infection, let alone the possibility of pregnancy. I had a vasectomy after Sophia was born, so pregnancy on her end would be impossible. But still, there was always the chance she could slip up with someone else, and it wouldn't be me raising any eyebrows. One haunting question kept resurfacing in my mind: where would she keep the condoms? It wasn't like she could stash them around the house, not without me stumbling across them at some point. And in the car? Too risky. No, the only place that made sense was at her office, hidden somewhere in plain sight. But most likely, she packed them right along with her work stuff when she traveled. I knew she carried a big briefcase with her on those trips, loaded with work papers, her laptop, presentation materials, all the usual business items. But if she had an early flight, she'd bring it home the night before, packing everything into her suitcase for the airport. This detail became crucial to me. I had to find a way to check her briefcase before she left for her next trip. If I was going to catch her, that bag was my best shot at finding something incriminating. With any luck, she'd have an early morning flight this time. I made up my mind to keep my cool, not let on that anything was out of the ordinary. The last thing I needed was to tip her off before I had the chance to confirm my suspicions. The kids came home from school, and as usual, I was wrapped up in the daily whirlwind of tasks: dinner prep, helping with homework, managing the chaos of the evening routine. In the middle of it all, though, the thoughts kept swirling in the back of my mind. I couldn't let it go. But I had to stay composed, at least until I could search that briefcase. Emily came home from work just as I was cleaning up a mess I'd made in the kitchen. I had accidentally knocked over a dish of beans, sending them spilling across the floor. Between wiping that up and keeping the kids in line, I was a bit frazzled by the time she walked through the door. But if she noticed, she didn't say anything. She greeted me as she always did, her usual self. I leaned in and kissed her on the cheek, trying to play it cool. We all sat down to dinner together, the four of us, just like any other night. I forced myself to make conversation, pretending nothing was amiss. I wasn't sure if she sensed anything off, but she didn't act suspicious. I took it as a good sign. As the conversation flowed, I casually brought up her upcoming trip. "So, you're heading out in a couple of days?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and nonchalant. "Yeah," she replied, a bit of exhaustion in her voice. "Same old thing." "Honestly, I'm not looking forward to it." She didn't sound excited, but she never did. Traveling for work had always seemed like a chore to her, at least from what she let on. That I couldn't resist digging a little deeper. "If you don't enjoy it, have you thought about looking for a different role? You've been with the company long enough. and you know the ins and outs. I bet you could slide into a desk job, avoid all the traveling. Wouldn't that be better for the kids too? I tried to make it seem like I was concerned about her well-being, but really, I was hoping to trigger some guilt. Maybe she'd confess something if she felt bad enough, she sighed, then gave me that tired smile of hers. I know. I miss you and the kids when I'm gone, but I need more experience before I can move into a role like that. I nodded, playing along, though my insides were churning. I really miss you when you're away, I added, laying it on just a bit thicker, hoping she'd crack. I think the kids do too, even if they don't say it, she softened, her expression growing more apologetic. I miss you all too, she said, almost sounding genuine. But I wasn't convinced. Not yet, so where are you headed this time? I pressed, trying to sound casual. Are you leaving in the morning? Maybe we can spend a little time together before you go. She looked up at me, aware the kids were sitting right there, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary in her reaction. Yeah, I'll be leaving in the morning. My flight's at 7:30, she explained. I'll be back by Friday then, in a playful tone, she added. I'll need something to keep me going until I get back, flashing me a teasing wink that I forced a smile, returning the banter. I'm sure you will, I joked back, trying to keep the mood light. To my surprise, she blushed, her cheeks turning pink. I hadn't seen her do that in a long time. But still, her bringing up the trip so casually in front of the kids didn't fit with the idea that she was hiding something. Either she hadn't been cheating, or she had gotten very good at covering her tracks. The mention of her bringing home her briefcase the night before her flight gave me the opening I needed. She wouldn't be stopping at the office before the airport, so her briefcase would be at the house, ripe for the searching. I tried not to get my hopes up, but deep down, I knew I had to look. I couldn't let this go without answers. On the night before her trip, she came home in high spirits, which only made me more suspicious. She pulled into the garage beside my car, her usual spot, and stepped out with a visible energy, a brightness that had me wondering if it was due to our earlier conversation or something else entirely. Was she genuinely excited about her trip, or was there a hidden reason behind her sudden uplifted mood? As she entered the house, I noticed something odd. She didn't bring her briefcase inside with her. I assumed she'd left it in the car, tucked away for later, perhaps when she packed her things. I was busy preparing dinner, so I didn't ask right away, playing the waiting game. We sat down for our meal like always, the kids chattering away, oblivious to the tension brewing inside me. Halfway through the meal, Emily casually asked, "Could you grab my suitcase from the garage after dinner?" "Certainly," I replied, forcing a smile, making sure not to give away my suspicion. "Are you all set for your trip?" she asked, almost as if trying to reassure me. "Oh yes, it's just another routine trip," I said, doing my best to sound indifferent. "My briefcase is in the car, and I'll pack an overnight bag in a bit." She sounded nonchalant, as if everything was perfectly ordinary, but my gut told me otherwise. Trying to keep up the normal conversation, I inquired, "Do you have any plans while you're away?" "No, nothing special," she replied with a shrug. "The kids and I will stick to our usual routine. Maybe we can plan something fun for the weekend when I'm back," she added with a smile, showing enthusiasm at the thought. "Sounds like a plan," I responded, though my mind was far from weekend plans. After dinner, she helped me clear the table, loading the dishwasher while I finished wiping down the countertops. Everything felt oddly familiar, yet strained beneath the surface. I waited for her to head to the bedroom to pack, before making my move. Once she was out of sight, I walked out to the garage to retrieve her suitcase. As I expected, the briefcase wasn't in plain sight inside the car, likely stashed securely in the trunk. This didn't faze me. I had already devised a plan to access it later in the evening. Away from prying eyes, I brought her suitcase into the bedroom, setting it down carefully by the door. "Do you know where the car keys are?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "My tire seems to be losing air. If I take it to the station, Lucas can fix it right away." She looked puzzled for a brief moment, but then reached for her purse and handed me the keys. "Couldn't you just use the spare tire?" she suggested. "That's what it's for, right?" I shook my head, taking a firm stance. The spare is for emergencies. We've got time to get this done properly. I didn't give her a chance to change her mind, quickly heading out the door before she could object. Back in the garage, I drove her car out, making my way to Lucas's station on the other side of town. Lucas was an old friend from school, and I trusted him enough to give me the privacy I needed. Pulling up in front of the service bay, I honked the horn lightly, signaling for him. Lucas opened the bay door and waved me in, letting me pull the car inside. He closed the door behind me, glancing at the car with a curious look. "What's up, man?" he asked, his voice friendly but laced with concern. "Everything all right?" "Not exactly," I replied, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. "There's something else I need to check." Lucas raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to the story, but didn't press. "Trouble at home?" he asked, eyeing me cautiously. I sighed, nodding. "Maybe," I admitted. With that, I popped open the trunk and pulled out Emily's briefcase, placing it on the workbench. Lucas stepped back, recognizing the sensitivity of the situation. "Well, I've got a customer out front." "Take your time, buddy," he said, giving me a reassuring pat on the shoulder before heading back to the shop. Alone in the service bay, I stood over Emily's briefcase, my heart racing. I opened it carefully, making sure to memorize its contents and the way everything was arranged. My hands moved through the pockets, feeling for anything out of place. Then, to my shock, I found it, a small package that felt all too familiar in my hands. I pulled it out and stared at it in disbelief. An open package of contraceptives, with 3 pieces missing. My heart sank, a cold dread settling over me. This was it. My worst fears were confirmed. She had been with someone else. I placed the package back exactly where I found it, making sure everything looked untouched. I closed the briefcase, locked it, and stashed it back in the trunk. By the time Lucas returned, I was leaning against the workbench, trying to steady my breathing. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Lucas asked, his tone laced with concern. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse with the weight of what I had discovered. "Afraid so." I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the sadness creep in, mixing with anger. "Mind if I stay a little longer? Maybe check the tire pressure while I pretend to have fixed the issue?" Lucas gave me a knowing look, not pushing for more details. "Take your time, man. I'll handle the tire." While Lucas worked on the car, I sat in the driver's seat, staring blankly at the dashboard. My thoughts were spiraling, anger, disbelief, hurt, all wrapped up in one tangled mess. How could she betray me like this? How could she betray us? Our family? Our children? I filled the car with gas on my way back home, not even sure why I was doing it. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because, deep down, I didn't know how to navigate what was coming next. As I pulled into the garage, the weight of it all pressed down on me, darker and heavier than before. Panic started to bubble up inside me, but I tamped it down. There would be time for that later. Now, I needed to think clearly, to plan my next steps. One thing was for certain, I couldn't confront her without more evidence. I needed to secure full custody of the kids, and that would require undeniable proof of her infidelity and misconduct. Despite her failings as a wife, I couldn't deny she was a good mother, and the children deserved her in their lives. But I couldn't let her keep them full-time. Soon, she would have to explain herself, to me, to her brother, to our friends. But for now, I had to figure out how to break apart the life we'd built without destroying our children in the process. As I entered the house, I called out from the bedroom, "Everything's set. It was just a minor issue with a nail." "Okay, thanks," she replied, her voice distant as she avoided eye contact. The atmosphere felt heavy, the air thick with things left unsaid. Seeking some comfort, I wandered into the kitchen and grabbed a beer. Then I made my way to the family room where the kids were watching their favorite TV show, completely unaware of the storm brewing in their parents' lives. I sat with them, trying to lose myself in their innocent chatter and laughter. For a while, I managed to push aside my suspicions and heartache, immersing myself in the moment. About 30 minutes later, Emily came into the room, sitting down next to me on the couch. My emotions had calmed, but a deep sadness washed over me as I realized that the life we'd built together was coming to an end. What had once been a happy family was now crumbling under the weight of her deceit, though the children remained blissfully unaware. To my surprise, Emily leaned into me, her body warm against mine. She snuggled closer and whispered, "Are you ready for tonight?" I took a sip of beer, my mind racing. "I think so," I replied, though I wasn't talking about intimacy. "But I've got a stomachache." "Oh, that's too bad, honey," she said softly, her voice laced with genuine concern. She wrapped her arms around me, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of the love we once shared. Despite everything, I instinctively put my arm around her shoulders, torn between my deep hurt and the remnants of affection. I wondered what had driven her to betray me. Was it excitement? Loneliness? Something I failed to give her. We put the kids to bed together, the bedtime routine feeling hauntingly normal. I watched as she kissed them goodnight, tucking them in as if everything was fine. By morning, she'd be gone again, off on another trip, and I couldn't shake the thought that this was more than just a routine business trip. The kids were already used to her frequent travels, so they didn't seem uneasy, but I couldn't help but feel the growing distance between us all. That night, we made love, but it was different. The usual passion was absent, replaced by a mechanical sense of obligation. She noticed the tension in me and asked softly, "Is your stomach still bothering you?" I nodded, unable to fully explain the ache inside. "Yeah," I said. "But I can handle it." Desperate for some sign that she would choose us, that she'd reconsider leaving, I asked, "Do you really need to go on this trip?" Deep down, I wanted it all to be a nightmare, something that would just disappear with the morning light. She sighed, her voice filled with resignation. "I'm sorry, honey, but this trip is necessary. I'll do my best to wrap things up quickly and be home by the weekend. I'm really looking forward to spending time with all of you." I sighed heavily, knowing her words were hollow. "Okay," I said quietly. "We should get some sleep." "You've got an early flight," she agreed, and I watched her as she slipped into the bathroom to shower. Left alone with my thoughts, I felt an overwhelming urge to check her suitcase. I hesitated, knowing it was an invasion of privacy, but my instincts pushed me forward. When I opened it, I found her usual business attire neatly folded on top. However, hidden underneath, I discovered a black cocktail dress and seductive lingerie, clothes she'd rarely wear on a business trip. I stared at them, my heart heavy with confirmation of what I already knew. She wasn't just working on these trips, there was more to her time away. I carefully placed everything back exactly as I'd found it, closing the suitcase before slipping into bed. Sleep eluded me, my mind racing through every painful possibility. At 5 in the morning, I heard her moving about, preparing for her departure. I stayed in bed, not wanting to face her. As she bent down to kiss my cheek before leaving, she asked, "Still not feeling well?" I simply nodded, my voice lost somewhere between anger and sadness. She left soon after, the sound of the garage door closing behind her echoing through the silence of the house. I lay there for a while before getting up to face the day. After seeing the kids off to school and eating breakfast in a haze, I knew what had to come next. I couldn't let this continue. The trust was broken beyond repair. I needed proof, solid evidence to protect myself and secure custody of the kids if things escalated to divorce. I pulled out the yellow pages and searched for private detective agencies, specifically looking for one with a presence in Denton, where Emily was heading. After making a few calls, I found an agency that had a branch in the area. I set up a meeting with them for that very morning, eager to get the ball rolling. Next, I reached out to a divorce attorney a friend had recommended. I arranged an appointment for the afternoon, needing legal guidance as I prepared for the worst-case scenario. When I arrived at the private investigator's office, I laid everything out, explaining my concerns and giving them a photo of Emily. We discussed her travel itinerary and arranged for her to be surveilled during her time away. They assured me they'd do their best to gather evidence, including photos if possible, and compile a detailed report by Monday morning. Satisfied with their professionalism, I made a substantial prepayment and left the office, knowing there was no turning back now. They warned me that capturing photographs could be difficult, but they promised to provide as much incriminating evidence as possible. By the time I got back home, the reality of my decisions weighed heavily on me. I was taking steps to dismantle the life we'd built together, but there was no other way. I needed to protect my kids, to secure custody, and to make sure they had the stability they deserved. Emily's betrayal had shattered the foundation of our marriage, and I couldn't let that destroy our children's future. The wheels were in motion, and by the time Emily returned, everything would be different. I just wasn't sure if I was ready for the fallout that was sure to come. I agreed that it would suffice. My afternoon meeting with the lawyer proceeded as anticipated. He outlined that in our state, divorce operates under a no-fault principle, which means neither party needs to assign blame to end the marriage. Since I am the primary caregiver for our children, it's likely that I will be granted custody. The lawyer emphasized, however, that Emily would be entitled to substantial visitation rights regarding our assets. He explained that property division would be straightforward, with a 50-50 split. Alimony wouldn't be required from either side due to our similar incomes, but since I would have custody of the children, Emily would be obligated to pay child support. Emily's inheritance was considered separate property and would remain hers. My primary concern was ensuring the well-being of our children. I instructed the lawyer to prepare the necessary divorce documents to be served to Emily on Monday. I also requested that Emily agree to vacate our house immediately upon the divorce. The lawyer confirmed that, as the children's guardian, I had the authority to make this request. It was agreed that once the children turned 18, we would sell the house and split the proceeds equally. Leaving the lawyer's office, a strange sense of contentment settled over me. I realized that while Emily would face the consequences of her actions, I was taking concrete steps to secure a stable future for myself and our children. I didn't immediately address other financial or legal matters, assuming I'd have time to sort those out after serving her with the divorce papers. With Emily's substantial inheritance, I figured she would not be concerned about our joint savings. That afternoon, as school ended, I went home to catch the bus. When Emily returned later that day, I offered to take care of her laundry, but she politely declined, saying she would handle it later. I couldn't help but smile at the playful irony. I knew well why she preferred to manage the laundry herself. It was crucial for her to keep her extramarital affairs concealed. Later, as we lay in bed, Emily expressed concern about my ongoing stomach issues and suggested I see a doctor. "This has been persisting for too long," she said, her voice filled with genuine worry. I playfully responded, letting her know I planned to try a new medication recommended by a friend to address my persistent stomach problems. I expressed optimism that this would resolve the issue and hoped it would bring her back to me soon. When we embraced, she whispered that she missed me greatly. It was a poignant moment, but the truth of her betrayal loomed large. On Monday, after the kids left for school and Emily headed to work, I received a call from the detective agency. They informed me that the report was ready. I told them I'd be there shortly. Within 30 minutes, I was seated with the office manager, discussing the details. The office manager informed me that a report with attached photos had been faxed from Denton that morning. He admitted he hadn't had time to review the entire report, but a quick glance at the photo suggested highly incriminating evidence. I took a copy of the report and began reading through it. The report detailed that surveillance on Emily Johnson began at 5:17 p.m. on Wednesday, June 16, in the lobby of the Denton Marriott Hotel. Her identity was confirmed by comparing a photo from the Merrickville office. Emily was wearing a company badge, affirming her identity. The report documented her movements and noted that she was carrying a briefcase. She entered the elevator and was confirmed to arrive at room 414 at 5:23 p.m. The report specified that she was alone at that time. The report included a photograph labeled Exhibit 1A, showing Emily dressed professionally before entering the room. She was still wearing her rings, and the photo had clearly been taken discreetly with a mobile phone. The agents had rented a room across from Emily's. At 6:31 p.m., they noted that Emily had left her room and headed for the elevator. A minute later, she exited the elevator and entered the lobby, dressed as described in Exhibit 1B. This photo showed Emily in a small black cocktail dress and high-heeled shoes. The evidence was mounting, and it was clear that Emily had not just gone on a routine business trip. As I examined the photos and the detailed account, the reality of her betrayal became even more concrete. The detective's findings would be crucial for my next steps in the legal battle ahead. The path was set, and now I had to prepare for the inevitable confrontation and the emotional fallout that would follow. The report was detailed and thorough, leaving no room for doubt. One of the most striking observations was the absence of Emily's wedding rings in the photographs. The photo labeled Exhibit 1D, captured at a restaurant, showed Emily in a tight embrace with a man, engaged in a passionate kiss. The intimacy between them was palpable, and the absence of her rings was stark. This detail, combined with the photograph from earlier, clearly indicated a deliberate effort to hide her marital status. The timeline of events was distressing. At 8:51 p.m., Emily and the man left the restaurant together. The next photo, labeled Exhibit 1E, captured them entering her hotel room, room 414. Emily appeared slightly intoxicated but unmistakably satisfied with the evening. The report detailed that at 11:13 p.m., the man left her room and departed the building. The license plate number recorded belonged to a car registered to Michael Reed, a married man with 2 young children residing in Denton. Further scrutiny of the report revealed an even more distressing revelation. Emily repeated her actions the following night with another man. This behavior confirmed my worst fears and revealed a pattern of infidelity during her business trips. The presence of her wedding rings in the earlier photos and their absence later suggested a deliberate attempt to conceal her true situation. Overwhelmed with a mix of anxiety and anger, I settled the bill with the private detective, thanking them for their work. I took 2 additional copies of the report, recorded on a CD, to ensure I had backup evidence. When I returned home, I immediately contacted my divorce attorney. I asked for an update on the divorce papers, and the attorney confirmed that they were ready for filing. Without delay, I instructed them to initiate the process and specifically requested that the papers be served to Emily publicly at her workplace the following day. The attorney assured me that this could be executed smoothly and requested her workplace address, which I provided. The decision to serve Emily with divorce papers at her workplace was both strategic and symbolic. It would not only provide a form of public humiliation but also serve as a measure of justice for the deep betrayal I felt. The morning passed with a heavy atmosphere as Emily returned home. She seemed to sense that something was off, although she didn't confront me directly. Instead, she expressed concern for my health and hoped for my swift recovery. Her demeanor was unusually reserved, but I chose to ignore it, focusing instead on the tasks at hand. The next morning, I woke up early after a night of fitful sleep. I kept myself occupied with work on the computer until the children began to stir. I went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast and went through our usual morning routine. When it was time for Emily to leave for work, she approached me for a hug and a kiss. I responded with a half-hearted embrace, encouraging her to leave quickly. As I closed the door behind her, I noticed tears in her eyes and heard her whisper, "I love you." The sadness that followed her departure was overwhelming, and I felt a deep urge to cry. However, I quickly composed myself, knowing that the children needed my attention and preparation for the school bus. Around 10:45 a.m., the phone rang, disrupting the morning routine. The caller ID displayed Emily's workplace. I answered the call without speaking, and there was a brief silence as the caller realized I wasn't willing to engage. Emily's voice came through, trembling and faint. She whispered, "I'm sorry." The phone call was a stark reminder of the depth of her remorse and the complex emotions that accompanied our crumbling relationship. The silence on the line was heavy, echoing the unresolved emotions between us. Emily didn't return home that night, and I found myself grappling with a mix of anger and self-doubt. Despite the justified nature of my feelings, I couldn't shake the thought that perhaps I had been overly harsh. The children were visibly disheartened by their mother's absence, their confusion and sadness palpable. To lift their spirits, I decided to take them to McDonald's for dinner, hoping to bring a momentary sense of normalcy. By the time we returned home, the kids were exhausted and went straight to bed. I was left alone with my thoughts, reflecting on the tumultuous turn of events. The following morning, Emily called, her voice tinged with desperation. "Honey, can I come home and pack my things?" "Can we talk?" she asked. Initially, a pang of guilt surged within me, but it quickly dissipated as I reminded myself of the betrayal I had endured. I replied calmly, "Why don't you come between 9 and noon? The kids and I won't be here. Regarding our conversation, I'll only speak with you one-on-one in my lawyer's office. You'll need to sign, notarize, and return the divorce documents first. Then I'll listen to what you have to say." There was a sob on the line before Emily responded. Good. The phone fell silent again, and I knew our path was set. She signed the divorce papers, and 6 months later, our marriage officially ended. The news that Emily had become pregnant during her affair was a harsh blow. The contraception had failed, and the timing of the pregnancy was unfortunate given her age. Even if I hadn't discovered her infidelity through the missing rings, the truth likely would have emerged eventually. Rumors circulated that she had begun dating again, and if she got close to marrying someone else, I contemplated warning her future spouse about her past infidelities. It seemed only fair to prevent another person from enduring the same deception and hurt. Our meeting in the lawyer's office was emotional. Emily pleaded for me to reconsider the divorce, lamenting her lack of access to our children. I explained that my trust had been irrevocably broken. She then revealed she had seen a psychologist who diagnosed her with nymphomania and assured me that her impulses were under control. Despite her assurances, I couldn't accept them as sufficient. Her lack of proactive effort to address her issues from the start only reinforced my decision. Her failure to seek help earlier suggested a lack of genuine commitment to change. As I left the lawyer's office, Emily continued to cry, a reflection of the profound regret and sorrow she felt. I had recently reconnected with a school friend who worked at a nightclub and learned that Emily had been seen there frequently on weekends. She was reportedly behaving provocatively with different men. This information deepened my hurt, as I was reminded of the irresponsibility she showed, particularly as a mother. Another friend of Emily's contacted me, expressing concern for her health. Emily had contracted herpes and needed assistance, yet continued her promiscuous lifestyle. I empathized with her situation but made it clear that I couldn't offer help or support. Emily had made choices that led to her current predicament, and it was not my responsibility to intervene. In contrast to my past experiences, I had begun dating again and found someone special. This new woman, who was around my age and had also been divorced due to infidelity, demonstrated strength and resilience that I admired. It was clear that my children liked her as well. I felt hopeful about the future and considered that, in time, our relationship might evolve to a new level. The progression felt natural, and I looked forward to what lay ahead.